Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to our Committee of Adjustment meeting. For those of you with a cell phone, I'm going to ask you to turn the ringer off if you haven't already done so. And if your phone does happen to ring during the meeting and you answer it, please don't start speaking until you're beyond earshot of the room. Now, members of the public who are with us this evening, if you have an interest in any particular application and you'd like to be notified of any decision, please be sure to fill your name and your address in on the sign-up sheets that are located at the back of the room on the right-hand side as you enter. That's quite important. So I'll now read the following notice. So the notice of decision for the applications we review this evening will only be forwarded to those who have either presented a written request for the decision or for those who have recorded their name and address on the sign-up sheets provided at the back of the room. Furthermore, a formal request is necessary to be advised of a possible Ontario Land Tribunal hearing on these matters, and in order to be able to make a presentation to the Ontario Land Tribunal, which is otherwise known as the OLT. So if you're following along remotely and you'd like to be notified of any decision or of any appeals that may result, please send an email with your name and address to our Secretary Treasurer, Lindsay Stamen. Her email address is lsthamann@cityofkingston.ca. And be sure to include your full name, your address, and the file number of the application. All right, so I'd like to share with you the 5-part format that I'll be using this evening as we navigate through each of the applications. In the first part, I'll start by introducing an applicant. And if you're the applicant or the agent, I'm going to ask you to come up to any one of the speaker's chairs to my right, tap the little green button and your microphone will come on, and you'll introduce yourself by name and address. We record that for the record. And then you'll have an opportunity to add anything further to your application or to ask for relief if that's what you were here to do. In the second step, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions of the applicant, their agent, or staff. And then in the third step, I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Now, members of the public can also line up to my right in a different chair in the speaker's area, tap the green button so that the microphone comes on, and you'll have an opportunity to raise your comment or ask your question. If you're joining us from Zoom, you simply just raise your virtual hand in Zoom, and then when I recognize you, you will also have an opportunity to turn your mic on, and then at that point you state your name and your address for the record, and then you make your presentation. Each speaker will be allowed 5 minutes for their presentation, and I'll be sure to give a warning at the 4-minute mark, but it will be very helpful if the speakers do not repeat the same information over and over again. That's just really not very helpful. Now, during this public portion of the meeting, don't expect an immediate response to your questions or your comments. It's during this portion where we record your questions and your comments, and it's only after I close the public portion of the meeting will the questions and comments be addressed by the applicant, their agent, or staff. And I'll be calling 3 times for public comments before I close the public portion of the meeting. Then we move into the 4th step of the meeting, and the 4th step I'll give the applicant their agent or staff to address the public comments. And in the fifth and final stage of the meeting, we'll turn it over to the committee members where we will deliberate over the application and make an ultimate decision. And that's it. I rinse and I repeat, and we use the same format for every application this evening. So that's about it. So I'll now call on Ian, our clerk, to confirm quorum. Ian.
Good afternoon, everybody, and through you. That's quite the echo there. My apologies. I can confirm we do indeed have quorum. Currently absent from the meeting is Aniz Karaj and Jordan Tekenos-Levy. There's also quite a number of members of the public, both in chamber here and on Zoom in the public viewing gallery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I'll now call the meeting to order at 5:34 p.m. and I'll refer you to the agenda. So committee members, we all received an addendum this afternoon, so I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the agenda with the addendum. So moved by David and seconded by Peter. And any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that is unanimously carried. Thank you. All right, now we're down to the confirmation of the minutes for the August 21st meeting. So everybody's had a chance to review them. Can I call for somebody to move? Okay, move they be accepted. So moved by Somnath and seconded by David. Any discussion? None. So all in favor, raise your physical hands. And that's unanimously carried by those that were here. I was not here, so I didn't vote. We have no delegations this evening, and there are no requests for deferral. Oh, I got to back up one here. Do we have any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? I see avoiding eyes and heads shaking no. So we have no disclosures of pecuniary interest. Thank you. We have no delegations, no requests for deferrals, and no returning deferred items. So the first piece of new business this evening is number 8A, which is an application for minor variance 386 and 390 Johnson Street and 40 Aberdeen Street. So Lindsay, can I have you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our first application tonight is for minor variance, file number D13-050-2023. The address is 386 and 390 Johnson Street and 40 Aberdeen Street. This is an application to construct a 6-story apartment building containing 45 dwelling units. And 2 pieces of correspondence have been included in the addendum for this application. Both were letters of support.
Great, thank you very much. And so do we have the applicant or their agent here with us? Okay, so if you can come and take the speakers area. And just in the future, so as Lindsay is reading or introducing the application, and you're the applicant or the agent, just make your way right up here and we'll get along, we'll go much quicker. So welcome.
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a planner with Foten Planning and Design. I'm here representing the applicant. The applicant, Amber Peak Developments, is also here this evening in the room. I'll just note that I've had a chance to review the staff report and the recommendations therein and the conditions, and I agree with all of those, and I've also had a chance to review the public correspondence. Mr. Chair, I would just like to note this is a project that I believe is the first that's come forward under the Central Kingston Growth Strategy. So it's a project of, I think, some significance. It's proposing a form of intensification at a location and in a form that was intended by council following extensive community consultation. And it's a project that we're excited to see come forward. And certainly if there's any questions or comments from the public or the committee, I'm happy to help answer them.
Very good. Thanks very much for that. And again, welcome. All right. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? None? No questions at all. Okay. So at that, I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 386, 390 Johnson Street and 40 Aberdeen Street? Please raise your physical hand or your virtual hand in Zoom.
So there is one person in the room that has raised their hand, so if they could kindly make their way to the speaking area. Yeah. I will also recognize Shelley Poffley on Zoom, and she can get started right away.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Hi there. Yeah. So just press the green button.
We have the online first.
Oh, the online first? Okay, sorry, we'll just hold off right for 1 second. Okay, so I'm told we have, Shelley Poffley. So Shelley, the chair recognizes you. If you could just state your name and address for the record, please.
Shelley Poffley, 4300 Bath Road, Kingston, Ontario.
Okay, yes, and go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here with Shelley. She just asked me to help her along here. My name's Ian Koss, 4300 Bath Road as well. Yep, the permit is just to replace stairs that are already there that were.
Sorry. So this is for a different application than yours. Yours is, I believe, the application at the very end of the meeting. So this is for the application for minor variance at 386 and 390 Johnson Street and 40 Aberdeen Street. Sorry, thanks.
Oh,
So we'll come back to you when we get to that application. So please do stick around. Okay, I'm sorry, sir. So if you could hit your microphone and state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, name's James Partington. I'm the owner of 38 Aberdeen Street, neighbors to the proposed development. I have to disagree right off the bat that there was extensive consultation because I had to find out by looking at the sign that was pounded into the ground. So I'm a little frazzled to say the least, but I also disagree with the fact that this is considered a minor variance. My house, my triplex at 38 Aberdeen Street is 20 feet high. The proposed development is 120 feet. I don't know much about the rules when it comes to development, but it seems like this is going to really affect the streetscape. It's going to absolutely affect the property value of my place. I have massive north-facing windows. I understand there's to be a big snow dump that's going to be right in front of the house, which is obviously going to affect my tenants. Let me just go over my little list here. Sorry for the pause. I've been told to use some buzzwords like streetscape and incompatibility and out of synchronization and property values and things like that. But really, at the end of the day, it seems like this is, and I do understand that there is a housing shortage and whatnot, but it seems like this is just the dumping of a giant building that does not at all fit the neighborhood and fit the lifestyle of Queen's University, of which I'm an alumnus. I've talked to a number of people who are my neighbors because I'm currently residing in one of the apartments. And nobody seems to really like the idea of there being a massive modernist building with really no exterior life plopped in the middle of the student housing area. And, and I totally concur with that vision. Having said that, I do appreciate that there's a housing shortage, but I don't agree with the idea that this is somehow going to increase the quantity of affordable housing. Developers in Kingston have not gone out of their way to produce affordable housing. These are going to go as much as possible, and I think the record speaks to itself. The new apartments that are appearing in Kingston are very expensive. And so I just don't think there's an argument. I don't think it holds water. And one thing's for sure, whatever ends up manifesting itself on this site, we will be able to check and find out exactly what these properties are going to go for. And I think we'll all have a little bit of egg on our face. Of course, the quantity of housing will go up without a doubt. But I don't believe that there's going to be an affordability aspect to this project at all. That's really all I have to say. Like I said, I wasn't notified. I saw the signs go in. We always knew that there was a rumbling of what would happen next door. I was expecting a giant billboard in black and white to say this is what we propose, and it turns out it was these little tiny signs that were tapped in, the first batch of which were washed away, the second of which are still standing, but they're quite small. That's really all I have to say at this point.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
If I could actually add one more thing.
Yes.
I don't really know how these things work. Is this the kind of thing where it's just stamped right away and they get the permit and they go, or are there more consultations, or is there a period of time? I've contacted a lawyer, but this is literally moments, you know, in the greater scheme of thing, and I'd like to potentially participate a little bit more in this.
Right, and that's a valid question, and
Yeah.
I appreciate the participation. It's not rubber stamped, but we will be making a decision based on the application, and we will be making that decision this evening unless it's deferred for some reason. But at this point, I don't have any information that would suggest it might be deferred. But there are other processes. I believe this is going to be subject to site plan control, which unfortunately, there's no public input in that process.
Okay, because I know that they've asked to have variances that essentially move the structure closer to my property. And the problem, if you will, with my property is that it's on a legal non-conforming site. So there really isn't much land. My building is basically sitting on almost all the property except for this right-of-way that goes out to Aberdeen Street. So there already isn't a buffer. So reducing the buffer even more and having whatever structures closer really affects it. And I also noticed in the photographs of the renderings that they did, my building is really not represented. I have a photo here which would show my concerns. May I show it to everybody?
Yeah, I would like to see that, sure.
Basically, my north-facing windows are 8 feet across, 4 feet high, and there's 4 of them. A 120-foot building in front of that that's occupying even more land than it ought to, I think is really gonna just kind of wreck things. I mean, one of the neat things about the building is the natural light, and
Just for clarification, is the north wall?
that's the north wall, yeah.
And Somnath, I'm sorry, I don't know if you have an opportunity to see this, so, yeah, can you see that?
I can just about make it out.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Imagine, if you will, a 20-foot building,
Right, then yours is 20 feet.
20 feet.
All right, thanks very much for that. We're at
All
the
right,
5-minute
appreciate it.
mark. Thank you. All right, do we have any other members of the community or public who wish to speak to the application for Johnson Aberdeen?
I recognize Ella Gallant.
Name again?
Ella Gallant.
Ella. Ella, the chair recognizes you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name's Ella Gallant. I'm currently a tenant at 386 Johnson. And my house and I have created a petition about this construction plan to knock down 386 Johnson and the units next to it. We currently have 654 signatures and are on our way to 1,000. We have several concerns about this construction plan as a student body and as a community as well. First of all, Aberdeen is not just an ordinary street. It embodies the rich history and spirit of Queen's University. Its charming architecture tells stories from generations past, reminding us of our roots as an academic institution. Destroying such an iconic piece of history like 386 Johnson would be a disservice to our community's heritage. Also, Aberdeen Street has long been known for its peaceful ambiance and student-oriented environment. The addition of a massive apartment complex will undoubtedly disrupt this delicate balance by introducing noise pollution, increased traffic congestion, and altering overall character that makes Aberdeen so special. A project this big will take years of construction, will negatively impact all the surrounding homes with noise pollution. Nearby students will not be able to study in their own homes with a construction project that large. The proposed construction project raises concerns regarding safety in terms of increased foot traffic on an already crowded sidewalk, potential strain on local infrastructure such as water supply or sewage systems, as well as limited parking availability in area already.
I'm sorry, I just want to excuse you for a minute. Excuse me for a minute. Could you speak a little slower? I'm having difficulty just understanding the words. Sorry. Go ahead.
Where would you like me to?
Just from that point forward.
So we are thinking, rather than demolishing a historic house at Johnson, we urge city officials to explore alternative solutions that preserve both the heritage buildings like this and the unique atmosphere of Aberdeen Street.
Okay.
That's what the student body has collectively agreed on for this petition.
Okay, and anything else?
That is everything.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate the comments, and sorry for the interruption. Okay, do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak to the application for Johnson Aberdeen? Please raise your physical hand or your virtual hand in Zoom, and I'll make my third and final call. Do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for Johnson Street or Aberdeen Street? Raise your hand. And seeing none, I will close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the applicant or to staff to address some of these concerns. Who wants to start? Yuko?
I can start first,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Thank you for the comments. With respect to the first speaker and the adjacent property, I just want to emphasize the height of the building that's coming through for the application tonight does incorporate a step down towards the lower density residential uses to the south, which is intended to, there's a 3-story step back at the rear portion, which is intended to step down to the lower density sort of single detached houses, which are permitted to come up to 3 stories just behind the intensification corridor. And also just to emphasize, and it's described in greater detail in the staff report, but just the work that's gone into the central Kingston intensification area, it is intended to accommodate additional density where there's a very walkable area, where there's transit and bike parking, or sorry, bike infrastructure. And there's a built form that's been enshrined into the zoning that is permitted to come to a 6-story height along Johnson Street. And then there is intended to be a setback at the rear of 10 meters, where in this case, there is a 3-story component in that 10-meter setback and still a 6.5 meter setback beyond that 3-story portion. So it should step down towards the property at 38 Aberdeen Street. There is currently a snow storage location adjacent to that property on the site plan drawings, and that'll be refined further through that would be refined further through that process, and we would look at plantings, and there is a landscape buffer required at the rear of the property that would border onto the south properties that we would look at in terms of whether tree plantings might be appropriate there, some sort of visual buffering or fencing through the site plan control process. In terms of notice requirements, we send letters to property owners within 60 meters of the subject property based on latest assessment rolls. So that is intended to catch adjacent property owners, as well as the signs that are posted on site. And I know the applicant was diligent in making sure those were reposted when there were some removals during the process, or student or members of the public who removed the signs and they were reinstated. We also put a courtesy notice in the Kingston Week Standard for notice of the applications. The second speaker, I heard concerns related to the heritage of the area, and I just want to emphasize that this property is not listed or designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, or the property subject to this application. So we didn't require a heritage impact statement as part of this application. There was also concern noted about noise for construction, which isn't regulated by our zoning bylaws. That would be regulated by our noise bylaw. And we will be asking, though, for a construction management plan as part of the site plan control application that would manage construction of this project, but the noise, construction noise would be regulated by the noise bylaw that would require construction to end at certain points of the day. In terms of water supply and sewer, that will be, there's no concerns with feasibility here, but that will be reviewed and secured through the site plan control process to make sure the services are upgraded. That's all I had here in my notes, but I'm happy to answer further questions if I haven't caught one there.
Sure, there were a few others I picked up on. One of the comments was this building, this application has the effect of dumping a giant building that does not fit in the neighborhood.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, this area has been identified as an intensification corridor through the Central Kingston Growth Management Strategy study, and we looked at, through that, areas of the city were looked at to accommodate additional growth in a 6-story form, and ways that that could transition towards the neighborhoods to the south. And this does predominantly, this development does meet the intent of those, the built form vision, the framework established for that policy with some minor areas of relief.
Mr. Chair, may I add as well to Ms. Didrickson's comment there that the 6-story height that was arrived at through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy was this culmination of, I believe it was an 18-month process. It was a long process. There was a lot of community consultation, a lot of walkabouts, and it aimed at doing two things: identifying where intensification should occur, particularly in the near campus areas, but it sort of ballooned to look at all of Central Kingston. It also looked at what built form could be accommodated and would be compatible in these areas, and what performance standards would be necessary in order to help achieve that degree of compatibility. So what we've seen in the implementation of the CKGS through the new zoning bylaw is these areas of intensification, this Johnson and Brock corridor being sort of the area where the most intensification is supported, and then along the Portsmouth corridor, there's, I think, an as-of-right permission for, I believe it's 4 stories, which I think is very indicative of the effort to find a maximum height that fits within a particular area. So the 6-story that was arrived at here included a number of performance standards and setbacks to achieve compatibility. One of those is the rear yard setback, the 10-meter rear yard. We are seeking relief from that provision to allow a 3-story portion of the building to encroach a little bit closer. And we arrived at that particular typology and that approach by looking initially at the permitted zoning in the adjacent properties to the south, which are not zoned for intensification. So those properties permit up to 3-story heights. So we felt that a 3-story height that could encroach a little bit into that setback was supportable, provided that the landscape strip that's required in the zoning would be maintained. And then the 6-story portion of the building would generally remain at the 10-meter. There is a small portion where the lot jogs in, and it's a little bit less than 10 meters at that one specific location. But by and large, the built form that was intended through the CKGS is being achieved on this site, and through the site plan control process, we'll look at ensuring that the type of vegetation within that buffer is effectively providing the types of screening that are intended for the site. Certainly, when the site is initially built out, that vegetation will not provide the screening. It'll have to mature into its full potential, but the intention is very much that screening will be provided through the zoning.
Okay. And there was just another comment that they pulled other people who say they don't like the thought of a larger building being plopped in the center of this area.
Through Mr. Chair, I would have to defer back to the CKGS and that exercise that found that this type of building, and this is one of those locations where that height was intended by council. Mr. Chair, I did also catch a question about servicing. There was a concern about the capacity of servicing. Yes. Through this application, sort of a high-level review was done, and a more detailed review was done through the site plan application that found that there is servicing capacity. There will be a need for an extension from Earl Street up, I believe, in stormwater, but there is capacity in the surrounding network for this scale of development.
Oh, okay. And my final concern was the one about not being notified of this. I think he said his address was 58 Aberdeen, and this is 40 Aberdeen. Does that fall outside the 60-meter radius for notice? It's 38. Oh, 38. Oh, so it should be right next door. Okay, so that should be well within. Do you have the records that it went out.
Through the chair, on page 38 of the agenda package is the exhibit which illustrates the public notification map, which encircles all of those properties that would have received mail notice of this application. So based on that map, it does appear that that property would have been included.
Okay, thanks. That was page
38 of the agenda package.
Okay, thanks. All right. Okay, well, I think that covers all of it. I know one of the effects of the variance had the effect of moving this structure closer to this citizen's property, and that is correct. We're seeking relief for a variance that has the effect of doing that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The 6.9 meter reduction is abutting that neighbor. And there, I believe it's page 26 of the agenda package, shows the site plan. And you can see on that page sort of the relationship between the 3-story portion of the building and the adjacent property.
And what's the mitigating, just, I've read it, but what's the mitigating rationale for doing so?
Certainly. In this case, the height of the building, the 3-story height, is part of the mitigating rationale, as is the inclusion of a landscape buffer in that separation distance. So there is a requirement in the zoning for a 2-meter landscape strip that would accommodate. It's a dimension that's wide enough to accommodate vegetation that can provide some screening, and that's what it's for.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. I got nothing else. So, committee members, questions?
I have a question for the...
Yes.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm with the applicant, and just on that 3-story height as well, I have another element to add. If you look at the site right now and the existing properties that are at the 3-story height down Aberdeen, which is the one that we're talking about, right now there would be a building at 3-story height within 1 to 3 meters or so of that southern property line. And in the built form that we have proposed here, the 3-story height gets extended all the way back to about 6.97 meters. So actually that 3-story height moves even further away from the southern property line by almost double or more of what would be there right now at the 3-story height. With this, we created that angular plane and made the angular plane so it was even further set back from the existing, and actually we believe would create further setback from the transitionary height of the existing 3-story neighborhood up to the 6, which was the intended max height under the Kingston Central Growth Strategy, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, I get that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we had a question over here. Dave?
I think you've largely answered my question. I'm wondering if a shadow study has been prepared at this point, or that'll be forthcoming at site plan, just to address the gentleman's concerns about his windows and shade.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and maybe Mr. Dixon can sort of add commentary on this, but a shadow study was not a requirement of the minor variance or the site plan application, largely because the property is to the north of the closest uses to the south. So the degree of shadowing it's minimal, and it's very much at sort of the extremes of the season. So if there's any shadow impact, it's unlikely to occur outside of, say, the shortest day of the year. But certainly there is enough data available that we could provide that modeling or undertake that modeling through the site plan control process and work with staff to examine that.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy, are there any designated or heritage listed buildings in the immediate area other than the subject properties?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this property isn't adjacent to any listed or designated properties. within the immediately adjacent or even within a few properties, this stretch of Johnson does not have any properties that are currently recognized under the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay, thank you. Could I continue?
Continue, yes.
My question, I think, would be for Megan. Was the intensification strategy for Johnson Street adopted at the same time that the current official plan was adopted? In other words, 2010 or earlier? Or is the intensification strategy something added to the current official plan post 2010?
Through the chair, good question. So the Central Kingston Growth Strategy is something that was approved by council in April of 2022. At the same time, the city's new zoning bylaw was brought to council. And so with that strategy were brought official plan amendments to implement new official plan policies for the Central Kingston Growth Strategy, along with paired zoning bylaw changes, which were incorporated into the new zoning bylaw 2022-62. So it was work that was approved in April of 2022.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Peter? Yes.
Yes, I have just a few questions. I guess the biggest one I have is we have 3 existing buildings on that lot on those lots right now that are going to be demolished, and the lots consolidated into one. So you're starting from a blank space. Why could you not design a building that would meet the zoning bylaw in that blank space? You've got a building that, number one, there's 9 different variances here that are requested. The one lot coverage, for instance, requirement is up to 55%, and you're actually asking for 64%, which I think was 119 square meters or something difference. And I'm just saying, by building to that maximum 55% that is permitted, how many of these other variances do you think would not arise? And that's my question. When we have a vacant lot, we have a building bylaw or a zoning bylaw, and yet we want to have 9 variances to that as opposed to just complying with the bylaw. I just don't understand that. I really don't. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's kind of a multi-part answer. The certain components that we're seeking relief for are effectively unavoidable. So in particular, that's the penthouse height. In order to build this building, the mechanical penthouse needs to be taller than that's what's permitted by the zoning bylaw to accommodate the elevator. It's based on the height of the building itself. Really building a building that meets that sort of 6-story height right at the limit forces the mechanical to be just a little bit taller. And so we need relief for that particular provision. The other, I think one of the lot area requirement is another one that is was unavoidable in order to develop these properties. The zoning bylaw has a minimum lot area requirement for a multi-unit building in the URM 8 zone. What that provision is intended to do is to force lot consolidation, which is what we're seeing here, to achieve a 6-story form as intended through the growth strategy. So the site is just a little bit short of that. It's 160 meters short of that, or square meters. So we needed relief from that particular provision. There's nothing we could really do about that. The other provisions around the built form were driven by one real underlying factor. So the zoning bylaw provisions in the URM 8 zone, they're untested. They're new provisions that were crafted through the Central Kingston Growth Strategy process. And they were crafted based on modeling that was undertaken by the planning department based on certain assumptions around both the economics of development as well as the resulting built form. So for example, sort of assuming a standard lot that met 1,480 square meters and all the provisions sort of were based around that particular built form. So when we looked at laying out this site and trying to model a form that would achieve the intention of really maximizing the intensification, which is what the CKGS was in part trying to do on this site. We looked at different provisions, and the provision that we felt was most indicative of council's intent around intensification is the floor space index, the FSI of 3.2. So it's a provision that we're meeting. We're actually 3.1. We couldn't quite get to 3.2. And in order to achieve that 3.1 FSI, we needed the build form and the sort of the overall massing and footprint that we're showing. So the footprint that's proposed required some relief to achieve the functionality that we ultimately are getting out of the building. But to make that work, to get that 3.1 FSI, if we had prioritized lot coverage, we wouldn't be able to achieve anywhere near that level of density, which would provide fewer units and therefore effectively not quite achieve that intention of trying to maximize development in this corridor. So we prioritized the goal of intensification and used that as our impetus for the overall built form, and the other provisions came out of that. But I think this is very important in terms of those provisions. We're not seeking sort of a carte blanche. All of the other reliefs that we're seeking, we reviewed against their potential impacts on adjacent properties, and we worked very closely on the design to maximize the other goal of the CKGS, which was a intensification in a built form that's compatible with the existing uses in the area and those surrounding lower density uses. So those houses to the south, for example, and the provisions that we've proposed through this exercise are, in our opinion, very much achieving that goal of compatibility. Another set of reliefs that we're seeking is just the parking. The visitor and car share parking requirements in the new zoning bylaw are quite high. And in an area such as this, where there is excellent public transit, it's a very walkable neighborhood. It's well served by regular and express bus routes. It meets those goals of sort of encouraging alternative forms of transportation than the vehicle. The owners are providing some cash in lieu of parking as well to reduce the parking spaces for users, but they also needed to reduce that visitor parking ratio a little bit, and that's one of the provisions that we're seeking. There is a car share space that would be proposed, and that car share space would function as a visitor space unless and until a future car share provider were to come to the site.
I think what I'm getting at, okay, the bylaw, right now, I think what I got from you there, the bylaw is too restrictive. So maybe the problem is the bylaw, but the thing is the bylaw is the bylaw. That's what council passed. That's what council accepted. And it's not the minimum standard, it's the maximum. We're looking at that lot and saying, as a maximum, this is what that lot should contain. But I just get the distinct feeling that we're taking it as a minimum. We should be able to exceed that. And that I have a problem with. I know that with a smaller footprint, probably be able to provide more parking. We'd be able to provide a better separation from the gentleman's house that is back there. You may be able to meet that. So those are my comments, and that's the problem I have with this whole concept of treating the law as the minimum. It's the maximum. So anything less than that is acceptable. Anything more than that, then you require 9 variances. You know, that's a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that. Ken?
I do have a question for the gentleman from Amber Peak, excuse me. I didn't quite understand your explanation, I don't think I did, as regards to 3-story height. Did I understand you to say that the selection of the setback of the 3-story portion of the building was driven by the allowable setback for a 3-story building, absent any other floors above? Is that correct?
I think I understand what you're saying, but we actually did a graphic in the report. I don't know if you guys are able to pull it up. No, okay, too bad. In the report itself, there's a graphic that illustrates the existing site, because we wanted to illustrate what the buildings look like now and what the future state would look like. And it's the elevation views. And what you can see in the elevation view is that the existing building at 40 Aberdeen is superimposed over the elevation, and you can see it at that 3-story height. And so if you imagine the entire neighborhood is mostly right now 3, kind of 4 stories if you include some of the, ceiling space above. And so with that, you can see that we carried the building on the downward plane, and yes, that little portion at the bottom is at the 3-story height where it extends a little bit further, but the existing building itself goes even further towards that line. Does that make sense at all or no?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may add, this is in the agenda package, it's page 35, where you can see the elevation of the existing house and there's sort of a dashed line representing the location of the house.
Yeah, and you can also see the extent of that 3-story knockout, kind of, within the full context of the site.
I'm looking at drawing, I think it's A402, which is the drawing to which you're referring, which shows the existing most southerly of the 3 buildings you own, ghosted, so to speak, over the rear portion of the building proposed. And it shows the peak, the apex of the building existing equivalent to the height of the 3-story portion of the building proposed. That I understand. But I think you suggested that it was an improvement because the proposed building is in fact further away from the south lot line at 3 stories than is the existing building. Correct? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
I have
Yeah,
one.
Dave, yeah.
Did I understand you correctly that you actually modeled a building form that was compliant with respect to setbacks and coverage? And if so, I'm wondering if you could give us an idea of the unit yield. I understand like physical lot size, et cetera, is out of your control, but did you actually model a compliant building?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so when designing the building, Yuko touched to this, floor site index has been kind of the most important zoning aspect, because what does floor site index mean? For every square foot of dirt, you are building, in this case, 3.2 square feet of building. And so that's from the Kingston Central Growth Strategy, that was meant to be the most indicative form of what it means to add density to the site. A lower density site might be like a 1 FSI. You have 10,000 square feet of dirt, you can build 10,000 square feet of building. In this case, we have about 14,000 square feet of dirt, and so multiply that by 3.2 to get to that total height. So if you look at all of the other zoning restrictions, you start to have, setback from this line, total lot coverage, and you can start to back into, well, what is my allowable buildable pocket? Then you take that buildable pocket and you pull it out of the ground, and you determine how many square feet are there, I guess. And when you look at this site and you go through all of those, different measures, the ending up state of the building is quite small. Maybe an FSI of 1.5, high ones, meaning that we're off the target density by 30% or 40% or something like this. And that is the nature of, how many lots were consolidated here, and then once you layer in all of those other restrictions, kind of what's possible on the FSI perspective. So yeah, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when we first looked at that what the unit yield was, but, much lower to the point of being unviable from a development perspective. And with those restrictions and the central growth strategy, we've looked at a lot of sites up and down the street there. And our honest opinion would be that if you were forced to comply with every single one, I don't know if there'd be a site that would be like possible to develop up to that 3.2 FSI, which was intended, unless you started consolidating 6 or more, 7, 8, 9 existing properties, which just practically speaking becomes very, very difficult to achieve. So yeah, so that's how we got to this build form. We're still even under that FSI, so we're not even hitting like, the target that was set. And really that, that floor site index is really important because it really speaks to how many square feet is being created. How many square feet is there of dirt and how many square feet of land, of eventual building we're getting out of the site. So I hope that explains.
Thank you for the explanation. It was excellent. So what I'm concluding is that we're looking at a 30% reduction in FSI, north of 30% if you were to be compliant within the building envelope.
Yeah, Yuko, or Jacob, do you remember?
Yeah, it would be my assumption that it would be approximately 30%. We did model it extensively. If we want to get into the exact development economics of a site such as this, due to the already high density of the site, if you look to the report, there's currently 6 units across the site, moving from approximately 30 bedrooms up to 120 across the site. The per square foot land cost in that corridor is quite substantial, and really maximizing your FSI is quite important when you have substantial per square foot land cost.
Just touching on your comment with respect to the cost of the land, I have no knowledge of what the percentage reduction would be to make it viable. Can you give us an idea? Like, are you able to tolerate a 10%, 15%, 20%? Like, is 30% like right at your limit, or is there any room for mitigating some of these variances?
Yeah, so to speak to the variances and the number of them, we actually do have the architect here from Raw Design. As you push back the different variances, so let's take the side yard variance, for example, the interior side yard, which we proposed at 2 meters, as of right is 3 meters. If we spoke with the city at length early on in the consultation process, they didn't want us to impede further out to the streetscape, so the exterior lot line or the front lot line. So we've requested no variances on those 2 sides. Instead, we've gone for a variance on the interior lot line. And why we requested that 1 meter variance is because if you actually open up our plans and look at the exact unit layouts, by losing a meter of horizontal depth, once you incorporate the elevator core, you really are hard pressed to put units into the, I guess, left side of the building, or west side of the building, and that's why we're looking for that variance.
Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, you also asked a question about the land economics, I guess. One good way to think about it in this area is like, opportunity cost. The land gets defined by the opportunity cost of what has to be torn down to make a new, right? And one way to think about that is how much density of people is being created on the site. Like we said, there's about 6 units there today across all of the buildings, about 30 bedrooms. And it is infeasible to tear down what is 30 perfectly good things and only build like, let's say 60 in replacement. The land ends up being like, too much of the overall budget. You do need a real density increase in the number of occupants or the occupant load on the site. So along with that FSI, it's not, the occupant load isn't contemplated in the zoning, but it definitely is contemplated from a, development feasibility perspective, because if you don't get that off, if the building isn't built to that 3.2, then the occupant load just like isn't great enough to allow the land economics to kind of work out as a percentage of the total budget for the project.
In terms of your potential purchasers, what sort of socioeconomic class do you anticipate this development would attract? Yeah,
So this is being built as a purpose-built rental. So it's not for sale, condominium units. But the specific targeted demographic is, Queen's University, university students. It's in that area. We have a lot of experience within the, neighborhood area. And the core reason why people are choosing to live in this location is the walkability and the centrality, of it. In our existing experience in the neighborhood, we kind of manage around 500, students in our greater, business. And of those 500, we only have like something like 50 cars or something like that in the entire portfolio. And so that's really the reason, that's the main driver, is location, location, location. And in this case, for this particular site, it's, equidistant to the ARC, the main, student life building, the university itself, Metro, the grocery stores, the hub of, Princess and Division. And so because of that location, the demographic is, very much student. And that's like through and through the plans completely. There's, designated library space as amenity, making it student-oriented, library, amenity space. And then the rooms themselves and the unit layouts themselves are also very centric to the needs of that market.
Megan?
Through the chair, if I may jump in here, I do want to speak to sort of the original line of questioning in terms of the appropriateness of the variances that are requested in this case. And the recently amended zoning framework that was put in place for the Central Kingston growth strategy area, which did contemplate the potential largely for lot consolidation. But of course, it's very difficult for us as staff to know when and where exactly how lot consolidation will happen. And that is part of the reason why the minor variance process exists, is to allow us the opportunity to consider appropriate reliefs to specific zone provisions where it makes sense to do so, and in particular where the building design is such that it provides for the mitigation of potential impacts, or it gives us the opportunity to consider site-specific constraints that might exist on a property. So as Jacob mentioned, in this case, we have been quite specific and strategic in terms of the variances that staff would be willing to support on this property. As he mentioned, we've been quite protective of the streetscape in this instance and wanting to maintain front and exterior side setbacks to protect pedestrian spaces at grade of the building. Whereas in other instances, as we've discussed tonight, the relief that's sought for the 3-story portion of the building at the rear of the property has been found to be appropriate in meeting the intent of the zoning bylaw, in that it is consistent with the built form that is permitted on neighboring properties to the south. So I do want to reiterate that we have put substantial thought into the appropriateness of the specific variances that are requested here and whether or not they are maintaining the intent of the provisions that were recently brought into effect last year. As Yuko also noted, they are relatively new provisions, and sometimes when we're working with these new policies and seeing developments use them for the first time, which is quite exciting, we are working through some of the kinks in terms of how those actually work on the ground in a real situation where landowners are looking at a lot consolidation. And I think this applicant has done that quite successfully.
Thanks for that lesson. That was good. Any other questions or comments? I do have one. So how many of these units are would qualify as affordable housing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no units at this time that are proposed as affordable housing. I think the idea is to contribute to the overall housing supply and therefore support affordability sort of on a macro scale.
What was that last part? I missed it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's the intent of this application is to contribute to the overall housing supply and support affordability sort of broadly in that way, rather than on this site specifically.
Okay, thank you. And where parking is concerned, I note that I add up that the performance criteria gives you the effect of requiring 25 parking spaces. Is that correct? I get 18 needed for the residents, 5 for visitor and 2 for car share? And 2 of those are included in 2 of the ones for the residents are deemed accessible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that sounds correct.
Okay,
yep, there's parking spaces requested to be addressed through cash in lieu. 3 parking spaces to be addressed through cash in lieu for residents, and the relief is being requested to the visitor parking space requirement, as well as the 1 for the car share space requirement.
So so we end up with a reduction of 9 spaces, I think, out of the 25.
Overall, yes, that sound, or there's 16 total parking spaces being provided on the site, 15 for residents, and then 1 would be a car share space that could be used for a visitor parking space in the.
16 from 25, so reduction of 9. Okay, so and I think I come at this from a different perspective. I have 2 daughters currently going to Queens, so we feel the financial effect of that. One lives 2 blocks away, and the other lives just less than 3 blocks away. So we are very much in this area, and I myself having rental properties in the same area. So I understand the parking issue very well. In one of my daughters, she lives in a house with 5 other residents, and they have 2 cars. And another house, my other daughter lives with 6 people, and they have 3 cars. So between the 2 of them, you have 45% of the tenants in 2 homes in need of cars. And those are not number of units, those are number of bedrooms. So I'm always a little concerned when I see an application that comes forth that proposes to provide relief for parking in an area, and I would consider this to be ground zero for probably the parking shortage and the parking problems in the city. So I just always have a problem when I see that, and I guess I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, for asking the question. On a parking-related note, we do actually manage buildings across the street at 375 Johnson Street, 385 Johnson Street, and 365 Johnson Street. And our parking is not fully leased at this time. We do blast all the tenants that we manage properties for to see if they need parking. And what we find is as you move closer to campus, parking requirements very much go down, and people opt to not have the additional $300 a month expense to have a car payment, and rather really prioritize walking distance to campus to lower that expense and live right near the university. So in our experience, managing tenants within this area, our parking is consistently not full. So it's a pretty good sample size, approximately 500 tenants in the area. So That's our opinion on parking.
Okay, what were those addresses again?
375 Johnson Street, 385 Johnson Street, and 365 Johnson Street.
65. And you say there's available parking there?
Yes,
underutilized.
directly across the street.
And do you rent them out then if they're not taken by students?
We don't. We don't rent them out to members of the public who are not tenants of ours.
Okay, they just stay for the building?
Correct.
Okay, thanks very much. I have no further questions.
I just had one more question, Mr. Chairman. The staff report refers to, and the recommendation refers to horizontal bicycle spaces, stacked spaces, and vertical spaces. I can appreciate what a horizontal is, but I had difficulty understanding a stacked bicycle space physically in terms of how you use it, and a vertical one. Can you tell me what material form they take in the building so I can understand how they're used?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in this case, the applicant's asking to be able to provide more stacked bicycle parking spaces, not vertical, but vertical I understand to mean that the wheels would be essentially mounted against, one on top of the other instead of horizontally on the ground, so mounted to a wall. And in this case, the stacked formation, I understand it to mean that there's bikes parked on one on top of the other, so that you can, there's some at grade and there's some up further, and there's a mechanism that helps you to get the bikes up. It's a more efficient use of space, I think, is why it's been proposed here.
So it makes use of the wall, essentially, for the purpose of hanging a bicycle. How does one get through? Not everybody has the strength to lift a bicycle up that high, I would think.
Certainly, and through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's a very fair question. The stacked parking, there are a wide number of commercially available mechanisms for lifting spaces. These are often the form of a ramp that sort of pulls out and down, and then you wheel your bike onto it, and then push your bike up. And they're sort of engineered to minimize the amount of force that's needed to do that, to make them as accessible and usable as possible.
So it's a mechanical form, is what you're saying, in order to stack it, correct?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We've been working to spec them. They're effectively spring-loaded, and they help you lift the bike, so strength is not necessarily a concern.
Thank you. I can appreciate it, given your descriptor. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And Somnath, you had a question.
More of a comment from the style points. Based on the solution of the form, would the developer or the architect comment that the wedding cake architecture is back?
Yuko, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I didn't quite catch that.
It's a wedding cake architecture where buildings are basically stepped back, like the Empire State Building.
Through Mr. Chair, I think this is really about that sort of stepping back is based on efforts around achieving angular plane and separation, more so than that particular architectural form.
Check.
Okay. And I just had one final question. What is the average floor space in each of the units? So what would the floor space be in one of the bachelor, one bedroom, and two bedroom?
Yeah, so we can pull up the exact plans, but many of the one bedrooms range towards 500 square feet. And you can see that on the plans. They're all denoted there on a per unit basis. And then moving up to greater than 1,000 for the 4-bedroom units that are proposed.
And what about the bachelor, studio?
You can.
I couldn't make it out on my plan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just kind of looking at these, I'm seeing some in the range of 500 square feet. I think we're just trying to find a bachelor here. $500 square feet for a bachelor.
Okay. All right, thank you. I have no further questions. So we've closed the public portion of the meeting. They've answered the questions. So any committee members, any other questions? So we'll go to deliberations. So can I have a motion? So moved by Somnath and seconded by Ken. All right, any discussion? Yes, Ken.
I think Somnath put it correctly when reference to a wedding cake. To me, there's two ways to deal with transition between compatible land uses, either physical separation or by design. That is to say, terracing or the wedding cake. The bylaw contemplates in the most elementary terms physical separation, 10 meters. I think this application makes an appropriate use of that lower elevation, the lower height, to encroach closer to the buildings in a form, together with the wedding cake, in a form that I consider to be appropriate given the objectives and the vision of council for intensification along the Johnson Street corridor. And I agree with the consultant's comments. I walked the corridor from Victoria to Division and back, and I didn't see anything of this nature, so it strikes me that this application, being the first, is a very, very important test towards achieving council's objectives, not only for Johnson Street, but also for Brock Street. I'll support the application. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other comments? No, so I'll call the vote. All in favor, raise your physical hand. And opposed? Okay, so 4 in favor and 1 opposed, and the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening.
All right, so next is our application for minor variance for 900 to 920 Gardeners Road. Lindsay, could you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance, file number D13046, 2023, 900 to 920 Gardeners Road. The minor variance is to reduce the minimum setback to a floodplain and minimum parking ratio.
Thank you, and you're the applicant or the agent?
Correct.
And your name and address, please.
My name is Alex Spinner. I'm representing Bravery Properties.
Welcome. Is there anything further you want to add to the application?
Thank you all for coming tonight. We're requesting 4 minor variances. One's 1.6 meters setback from the EPA designated land to the provincial standard of 6 meters.
Yep.
The other one we're requesting is a 2-meter reduction from 8 to 6 for the interior side yard depth.
Yeah, no, we see all that, but did you want to add anything further that we don't have? Or is the report pretty self-sufficient?
It's self-sufficient, especially from the city and the council, but I'll respond to questions after.
Yes, thank you very much. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? No? Okay. So I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 900 920 Gardeners Road? Please raise your physical hand in Zoom or physical hand in this room. Is anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for Gardeners Road? Raise your physical or virtual hand. My third and final call. Do we have anybody wanting to speak to the application for 900 to 920 Gardeners Road? Raise your hand. Let yourself be known. I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a decision. I need a motion. So moved by Somnath, seconded by David. Any discussion? I see none, so all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. And number C is an application for a minor variance for 61 Baden Street. Lindsay, can you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance and consent, file numbers D10029, 2023, and D13047, 2023, at 61 Baden Street. The minor variance is to permit a reduced lot frontage and reduced front setback for a porch and a balcony. The consent is to sever the property into 2 lots measuring 517.5 square meters in size and with 10 meters of lot frontage on Baden Street, and to establish a reciprocal easement over the proposed shared driveway. I'll also note that one piece of correspondence has been included in the addendum for this application.
Great, thank you very much. And you are?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kelsey Jones. I am a planner with FOTEN Planning and Design in Kingston. I'm here on behalf of the applicants this evening. At this point, I would just like to note that I have reviewed staff's report along with the piece of public correspondence received. I am in agreement with staff's recommendation, and should there be any questions from the committee or the public, I'd be happy to assist with answering.
Great, thank you and welcome. So committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? Yes, Peter.
Again, there was a comment made, and I'm looking at the lot, at the lot that's going to be divided, and then the buildings, the existing buildings on it will be demolished and new ones constructed. Once again, that's a very deep lot. The two buildings, the two new dwelling units are going to be right at the very front, similar to where the ones are now. Is there a reason that they can't be pushed back to make, again, to meet the requirements of the bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is a zoning requirement of this particular zone and many of the kind of lower density residential zones in the city, which requires a maximum building depth of 18 meters. And building depth is measured from the required front yard setback back to that 18 meters. So while we would love to push the buildings back and make better use of that rear area on the property, that's actually not permitted by the current zoning. So the minimum front yard setback of 4.5 meters, I believe, plus the 18 meter building depth maximum basically establishes a maximum kind of rear building line of 22.5 meters. So the current zoning doesn't allow any buildings beyond that 22.5 meter line. So the current plan that's proposed is maximizing the building depth to what's permitted at 18 meters. So we're not seeking relief for building depth, but what we are seeking relief for is the front porch of the building. As you've noted, we are seeking relief, kind of just encroaching a bit into that front yard setback, specific to the front porch and the balcony. And the intent of that is to provide a more functional kind of depth for those two spaces, to provide excuse me, just more usable, beneficial space for tenants of the building. So, long story short, if we were to move the building back, that would require an additional variance, which I don't believe that staff would be supportive of. I'll let them speak, but that's my understanding.
Again, so if they had to move the building back to comply with the front lot setback, then they would require a minor variance to the rear lot line. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in effect, that would be correct, but our understanding is that staff would not be supportive of that building being pushed back. So the result would basically be a reduction in kind of the depth of the front porch. So the overall building would shrink, but it would really just be taking off, I guess that would be an extra 1.5 meters of the front porch area.
I guess I'm looking at the impact, to the streetscape, and some of the comments that were made in the addendum that we received this afternoon. But again, to me, it just make more sense to utilize some of that rear yard and create a little bit more of a front yard that's required, that would be more compatible with the surrounding dwellings on that street. Again, that's just my comment. I just wondered why it could not be back, and like you said, staff would probably be able to answer that, but why that would be preferable to decrease the front yard setback as opposed to the rear yard setback in this particular case. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Ken, you had a question?
My question is for Chianti. Is this application subject to site plan control?
No, this would not be subject to site plan control because it is under 10 units.
There's a statement in the report that caught my attention. I looked at the relevant official plan policies and I couldn't understand how the policy would be, or I don't understand how the policy would apply, given your remarks. I'll quote it. It says, future development of the site will be subject to the heritage character area policies of section 73D3 of the official plan, which is the heritage policies for the Portsmouth area. How would those policies be implemented? Is it the simple case of the balconies and the front porch contribute to that heritage quality, or is there something else to come, I guess, through the building permit process?
So I believe that comment was from our heritage services. I'll just have to pull it up and take a quick look. And I'm sorry, can you remind me what section you were referring to?
It was page 7 of 13 of the report, subitem 1, fourth full paragraph, last sentence. I'm just curious on how that would be implemented and what form that might take compared to the drawings we see.
Sorry, I just need a moment to find it. It's just going to take me a second to pull that up. Can we continue and I'll circle back to it? If
Can
that's
I
okay?
ask another quick question in the
Yes,
meantime? I'm just a little unclear on the rear yard setback requirement. Was it 22 meters? Did I understand that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the rear yard setback requirement is, there actually is no minimum rear yard setback.
That's what I saw in the site statistics table, so I'm a
Yes.
little unclear why you can't push it back.
Through you, Mr. Chair, happy to provide some clarity on that. So the setback requirement, the rear setback for this property is in a way regulated through the building depth provision of the zoning bylaw. So while there isn't a specified minimum rear setback, how the building depth is defined is based, it specifies that it's the measurement of building depth starts at the minimum front yard setback and kind of goes to the maximum point on the property, which in this case would be 18 meters. So while there isn't a minimum rear setback per se of the zone, the maximum building depth regulates where that rear building wall can be. So I can appreciate maybe some confusion about that. While there isn't, a specific, 7.5 or 10 meter rear setback, that building depth maximum regulates where that rear wall of the dwelling can be on the property.
I understand that, but that leaves you with 29.2 meters to work with. Like, you're compliant with the 18 meters. I see that on the site plan. So again, I'm just fuzzy on why it can't come back.
Yep, maybe Megan?
Through the chair. So I think essentially what this came down to is there would either be a variance required from the building depth provisions of the zoning bylaw or to the front porch setback provisions of the zoning bylaw. And the applicant has opted to pursue a variance for the front porch setback in this instance, which staff have found to be supportable, especially considering the surrounding existing context. Along Baden Street, we see several reduced front yard setbacks and setbacks for porches. So it's very consistent with the character of the area and is preferable in that it doesn't raise the potential for concerns in terms of loss of privacy or overlook that we can sometimes see come up where a variance for building depth is requested. So I think that's how they landed on that particular option, if I'm understanding correctly, but I'll let Ms. Jones correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay. And, yep.
And if I may circle back to that character area, so it's possible that this was a typo or transferred over from the heritage designation report. So in this section of the minor variance report, we're talking about the Heritage Committee report, so it's possible that that was incorrectly translated over. So just for clarification regarding the aesthetics and the character, we are not permitted to do site plan control on these applications or properties. So in terms of character and look of the building, we do not have the tools through the minor variance to control what the building will look like. So regarding the comments that were received in the addendum, where it's talking about aesthetics and character, we are limited in what we can require. So building color, shape of windows, that type of thing. This property did have a listed property that was unlisted through that process. So it is no longer subject to the Ontario Heritage Act permits for clarification. So thank you for that clarification.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have any members of the public wishing to speak to the application for 61 Baden Street? Yes. Yep, you can come over to any one of these right over here if you want. A little closer to home. Yeah. Anyone with a microphone. And you'll just see the green lit button. Okay. Green button.
Those ones are a bit more complicated.
And then yes, oh, there I am. Hello.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Paul Ann Peters. I live at 37 McDonald Avenue, which abuts 61 Baden in the backyard. I have to say I don't have a huge concern with the proposed building or the variances. My questions are that I need some clarification on is in the application, it says the number of proposed trees proposed to be removed is 0, and I find that hard to believe. So I'd just like some clarification, please.
And any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Let me just, the backyard, just to give you an idea of what the backyard does look like, it is a bit wild. It's full of trees and it holds an abundance of nature and songbirds and coyotes. Well, no, maybe not there, but little foxes that do come through. A couple of years ago, there was a study done and there were 3 species of endangered bats that fly through that back area. I would like to see that maintained, and with the proposal of no trees being cut down, there's going to be some trees cut down because there are Manitoba maples along the side of the yards that will fall on people's houses and cars, so I can't see that they will not come down. There will be trees cut down in the demolition. My concern is greatly in the backyard area to maintain some sort of green space and wilderness that is there presently.
Thanks very much. Do we have any other members of the public with us who wish to speak to the application for 61 Baden? Please raise your physical hand or your virtual hand in Zoom. Yes, come on up. And just the button
on the very bottom of the, nope, it's a bit different on this one.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, yeah.
Okay, my name is Jim Cahoon. My wife Rosemary and I live at 73 Baden, which is 2 doors down from 61. One question I have is whether a single development, a single building on this property was modeled, and whether, if there's a need for the severance. And I think I understand the need for the setback variance, but I'm just curious whether the proponent looked at a single building and whether that could be viable. It's going to be a difficult building site because there's bedrock comes to the surface, so any basements or foundations are going to need to be chipped in. So it's also, the site is on the top of a hill. Anyone who's not familiar with it, it's across the street from the former, well, it's still current Church of the Good Thief. So it's on the top of a hill. So did they look at, a single building and go for a variance for an additional story? I'm I don't completely understand the need for the severance into 2 separate triplexes, why there couldn't have been a single building on a very large lot.
Okay, good. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, thanks very much. Do we have any other members of the public with us?
Yes, so I recognize JF on the Zoom gallery.
Okay. Welcome, JF.
Hi there. Yes, my name is Joel Friesen. I live at 67 Baden Street, so I will be next door neighbors to the work being done here. Just echo some of the thoughts of my neighbors, Paul Ann and Jim, who spoke. Not sure I fully understand still the issue with the not being able to have a backyard variance. And then the part of the justification for not bumping it further back was the context on Baden. Some clarity on what that means would be great, because the context on Baden is difficult to sort of clarify, I would think, considering there's houses set at different distances back. There's a lot of character to try and, I'm just not sure if context is implying some sort of uniformity.
Joel, I'll just interrupt you for a second. I'm just not clear. Is your question that you don't understand why there is no backyard variance?
I'm understanding why it has to be pushed up, why they're asking for a variance to come closer to the street, as opposed to being able to instead just move it back a little further into the backyard. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, and I echo the questions about the trees being taken down and some of that wild that is sort of does exist in this part of the community and has been maintained.
Okay.
Those are my only questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much for chiming in. And do we have any other members wishing to speak to the application for Baden? Please raise your virtual hand or physical hand. And I'll give one fourth and final call. Do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 61 Baden Street? Please raise your physical or virtual hands. And we see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the applicant or staff to address these questions.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'll just kind of start with comments as they were heard. Regarding the tree removal, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not sure in which report it notes that no tree removal is proposed. There are several trees on the property currently, and some will need to be removed to accommodate the proposal. And At this point, it's uncertain as to how many and which will need to be removed. That'll be further confirmed through the building permit process and finalization of the site grading plan by the project engineer. But what I can say is that there's minimal changes proposed to the rear portion of the property. So it's generally understood that that the trees within the rear yard will be maintained, as well as, the majority of that rear yard behind the parking is intended to be retained as green space for the tenants of the property. So we recognize that existing kind of open area of the property, and it is the intention to retain it as such through the proposal. In terms of the, consideration for a single building on the property, I find it's a difficult question to answer because that's not the application before the committee this evening. The owner, the applicants are seeking to sever the property to support additional residential opportunity and intensification within the neighborhood. So at this time, the proposal is to sever the property to support 2 3-unit dwellings. I appreciate the comment related to, the potential for a difficult building site, the potential for bedrock. A civil engineer is retained on the project and will be assisting through the building permit process. So anything construction related will be determined through that process. In terms of, again, the question regarding, why can't more of the rear yard be used? It's simply a matter of the current zoning provision related to maximum building depth. We're seeking to, meet that zoning requirement, recognizing, the existing development of the property, trying to maximize the green space on the property, while also, providing residential opportunities. So at this time, we're not seeking to kind of increase the building depth, and instead kind of seek relief for the front yard, mainly to, maintain kind of that streetscape and recognizing the existing setbacks of the adjacent properties, which are less than what the zoning currently permits. I think I covered everything, but I will pass it over to staff if they have anything additional to add.
Thank you very much. That was a great summary. The only thing I will add is that in terms of removal of trees and vegetation, those are regulated by our tree bylaw, which does not require preservation of the trees in this situation. I will also note that under that tree bylaw, if there were no variances coming to the committee, the applicant could go ahead and remove those trees, just for a little bit of context. But as it was mentioned, that backyard is not slated for a lot of development. So it sounds like there is a goal to maintain some of the vegetation. And in terms of the setback of that building, I just want to make sure that it's clear that that's not the application that was reviewed. So it's difficult to speak to whether or not we would support pushing that building back. So the effect in that case would be a variance for the building depth instead of the front setback. And just to clarify, the front setback is not for the building that we're looking at a variance for. It's only for the porch and the balcony, if that does provide a little bit of clarity as well. Thank you.
That's very good. Thank you for that. Okay, so committee members, do you have any further questions?
I have more of a comment. I notice on the site plan that the trees, and I'm presuming these are the existing trees, are superimposed on the back with no sort of commentary in the site stats table, existing, proposed, retained. Given that this area will likely be where you'll have your fill stockpile when it's excavated, is there any anticipation of returning the area to a treed state? Do you have any kind of plantings envisioned for that area, or could you just clarify what these green rings mean on the site plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. At this point, this concept plan is conceptual. While it accurately reflects kind of the driveway and the building area and that parking area. At this point, there hasn't really been much detail put into that rear area. You're right, it more than likely, it may need to accommodate fill and kind of, some construction methods, but I will note that there's a very large, well, not very large, there's the parking area behind where the buildings will be, which more than likely would be where any kind of construction staging would need to occur. Your point, though, is very much appreciated in terms of kind of maintaining that backyard in kind of that natural environment, retaining those trees. I understand that it's the owner's intent to maintain that green space, very much, to ensure that tenants of these dwellings have that kind of large green space opportunity. So I expect that there will be additional plantings that occur. At this time, I don't have details on those, but I expect that those would be considered through the construction and the building permit process.
Okay, good. Any other questions from committee? Peter.
Just a comment that, did I hear you correctly when you said that to move the building back, you'd have to decrease the size of the building?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we were to increase the front yard setback without requiring a variance to building depth, the dwelling would shrink in size. Sorry if I misunderstood your question.
No, I'm just sorry. I don't see it. Like, I'm looking at it. The building is sitting here. To get compliance with that front yard setback, you move it back 1.3 meters, and you encroach 1.3 meters further in the backyard, which there's lots of room back there. And so I don't see having to decrease the size of the building to achieve that. It'd be a variance, but possibly if there's a requirement that prohibits you doing that without a variance. But I think it would be a much preferable option, for the neighborhood. Anyhow, that's my comments.
Okay, that's good. Ken.
I'm not sure if I quite understood what you just said. If I heard you right, did you mean to say, or did you say, that to push the building back would compel a variance to building depth? And is this because the building depth is measured from the front lot line as opposed to the front wall of the building? It's measured from the front lot line, is that correct? Hence the need for the variance at more than 18 meters?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, any other further questions? So we'll go into deliberations. Can I have a motion? Moved by Ken and seconded by Somnath. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, application 8D, which is an application for minor variance and consent, 15 Redden Street. Lindsay, you're on.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance and consent, file number D10-025-2023 and D13-036-2023 at 15 Redden Street. The minor variance is to reduce the minimum lot area for severed and retained lots and to reduce the rear yard setback for the retained lot. The consent application is to sever a 542 square meter lot with 21.7 meters of frontage on Lakeview Avenue and to establish a servicing easement across the rear yard of the retained parcel.
Great, thanks very much for that. So do we have the applicant in the house? Welcome, Crystal.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal McConkey, and I am a lawyer with Solway Wright, and I'm here as agent for CDN Homes Kingston Incorporated, who are the owners of the property, currently municipally known as 15 Redden. I've reviewed the staff report, and I agree with their recommendations, and I don't have any additional information to add at this time, but I am, of course, available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? And I see none, so I'll open the public portion of the meeting. We have people with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 15 Redden Street. Please raise your physical or virtual hand. Is anybody in the gallery? Okay. My second call, do we have anybody wishing to speak to the application for 15 Redden Street? Please raise your physical or virtual hand.
I am going to recognize Matthew Irvine.
Matthew, welcome.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Matthew Irvin. I live at 46 Lakeview Avenue.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, we want to understand why the severance is going forth when we're concerned that it's going to be turned into a rental unit facility, and it's not. This neighborhood isn't conducive to that whatsoever. We feel that the purchaser of the property has never lived in the neighborhood, and it would create construction directly across the street from our house. And if it's going to be, I just don't think it's conducive to our neighborhood to sever that. And at this point, it's perfect green space. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak to the application for 15 Redden Street? This is my last and final call, your last opportunity to raise your hand. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to staff or the applicant to address the concern. Maybe Crystal, did you want to, or we have, okay, Lindsay?
I'd be happy to just respond to that briefly. What we're talking about is really dwelling units and available gentle intensification of a mature area. What's not being proposed is multi-dwelling units. We have one house that already exists. It will remain as it is on the retained lot, and there is future development anticipated on what we are considering to be the proposed severed lot. At this time, there are no development applications, and any development applications would need to go through the permitting process, and if any requests for further variances would be required in order to accommodate that, that is something that would have to be dealt with at the time that it is developed.
Okay. All right, and did you want to add to that, Lindsay?
Through you, Mr. Chair, nothing to add to that, but happy to answer if you have specific questions.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, committee members, any questions before we go into deliberation? Okay, can I have a motion? Moved by Peter, seconded by David. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you. Next, we have number 8E, which is an application for minor variance, 5 Grenville Crescent. Lindsay?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance, file number D13-041-2023 at 5 Grenville Crescent, to construct an extension of an existing deck which exceeds the maximum area provision for decks greater than 1.2 meters above finished grade.
Great, thank you. Do we have the applicant with us? Or the agent?
Yes, Matt Archibald's here.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Adam Archibald.
Okay. Okay, is there anything further you want to add to the application?
I don't think so. He just said no.
Oh, your mic is off, but.
Sorry, Matt Archibald here as well, and there's nothing further. We're here for questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or staff? And I see none, so I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have members of the public with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 5 Grenville Crescent? Please raise your virtual hand in Zoom or physical hand. Do we have anybody with us this evening wishing to speak to the application for 5 Grenville Crescent? Please let yourself be known by raising your hands. And my third and final call, is anybody here this evening with us wishing to speak to the application for 5 Grenville Crescent? Please raise your hands. And we see nobody, so we'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Somnath and seconded by Peter. Any discussion? So all in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have number 8F, application for minor variance for 1157 Halifax Drive. Lindsay, can you read this into the record, please?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for minor variance, file number D13043-2023 at 1157 Halifax Drive, to permit a 0.35 meter projection into the required 1.2 meter pedestrian pathway. I'll also note that several pieces of correspondence have been included in the addendum for this application, pages 1 through 14 of the addendum.
Right, thanks very much for that. And you're the applicant, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Golden. I'm the applicant, and this is Amber Johnson, who is a co-owner of the property. So we have reviewed the application package and agree with the recommendation of the City Planning Department. We believe this is exactly a type of gentle densification that would be desirable to increase housing supply in the City of Kingston. Furthermore, as you can see from the addendum package with the extensive correspondence, we believe we've done our due diligence to address all the potential concerns, and we welcome any questions from the committee or the public.
Very good. Thanks very much for that. Committee members, do you have questions for the applicant or for staff? Ken.
My question is for Jacob. I read the email exchange between yourself and Ms. Smith and Mr. Gale. There was a point you made, which I just want to be sure I might have missed a point. I just have to find it. Give me a moment.
I just have a brief comment in the meantime. Wondering what the lighting situation is at the site, and also just a comment. I recently built a house and they put a protective cover around the gas meter. That's an option, and again, just wondering how that's lit up right now. Thank you.
Maybe we could answer that, yeah.
Yeah, so our plan with lighting is we purchased wireless solar power lamps, 8 in total, that we will install along the path. So they're automatically powered and they will turn on when the sun goes down. And thank you for the recommendation regarding the protective wrap around the gas meter.
And just if I can follow on that, there's a provision to ensure that the light does not spill onto neighboring properties. Is that you'll take that into account?
Yes, we will take that into account.
Great, thank you. Okay, Ken.
Yeah, so Jacob, in your September 18 email, it stated the proposed walkway will begin at the front property line of Halifax Drive and end at the door to the additional residential unit. Wouldn't it be the case it would go to the curb as opposed to the front property line? The boulevard's going to have a walkway in it as well, correct?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I haven't confirmed exactly where the beginning of the proposed walkway would be, but my understanding is that there's already a walkway that is adjacent to the driveway at 1157 Halifax, and I would imagine that the walkway that would lead to the door of the additional residential unit would sort of grow outwards of that, go around the house, and arriving at the rear door for the additional residential unit.
Yeah, so they can either come to the curb or the driveway in the front yard, one or the other. It's not going to just start at the lot line and be a straight piece of concrete and stop right there. It's going to go one place or the other, right? So that it's clear to the neighbors which two options the applicant can exercise.
Yeah, if I could, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, again, if I could clarify further, it wouldn't be anything where it would start at the curb and have the appearance of a public pathway, since that's been a concern that's raised. For instance, further up on Halifax Drive, there is such a public pathway that leads to the open space area at the rear of the property, and it wouldn't have any resemblance to that. It would be much more in line with a pedestrian pathway that you see adjacent to many residential properties in the area, rather than a public pathway.
I do have a question for the applicant. In the email exchange, it became somewhat apparent that the neighbor is contemplating, if not already executed, a fence along the lot line. Have they built a fence? Or are you planning to participate with them on the installation of a fence?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we have discussed as you can see from the pictures in the application package, there are stakes at the interior property line. These stakes were put up by the owners of 1157, and 1155. The stakes were put up by the owners of 1155 Halifax Drive. We did ask them what the reason for putting up the stakes were, and they expressed to us intention of building a fence. We would certainly allow that if they choose to build a fence there.
Sorry, if I could just add something through you, Mr. Chair. The stakes that are on the property line of 1155 Halifax were actually in place before we even fully closed on the house. We did a walkthrough of this property before closing, and our realtor did bring it up to mention that they were already there. And so we were obviously not owners of the property or had discussion about the building of the fence before we even owned the house.
So the applicant's house is 1.24 and 1.23 meters from the side lot line. And the sidewalk is to be 1.2 meters, the difference being 2 inches. It's very, very tight. So staff are satisfied that that's sufficient space to build a sidewalk in fundamental conformity with the bylaw and comply with the grading issues that the neighbor has raised, which I think are very, very important issues, given the very 2.4 meters between the houses with a swale. Take half of that, put it in concrete. Somebody's got to handle the drainage properly, that's for sure. Sure.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it is true that it is quite tight in the area because of the way that the house has been developed, the single-family dwelling on the property. There is only 1.23 meters according to the survey on one side property, and on the other side yard, I believe it is even smaller than this. So the side yard where the walkway is proposed is the only feasible location for the walkway that's required by the zoning bylaw. And while it is tight, while it just barely complies, it does comply with the 1.2 meter provision. The only reason that the variance is required is because of the gas meter at that one particular part, which we've referred to as a localized protrusion in the staff report. At all other points along the pathway, it does comply with the 1.2 meter provision. It's just that for this one very specific point, it doesn't comply with the specific wording of the bylaw that it must be unobstructed. But as part of the bylaw, as part of the application and technical circulation and review, this was reviewed by staff such as fire services. And one of the main reasons for this unobstructed pathway is for the contingency in which emergency services would be required. If someone needs to get a stretcher through, for instance. So we made sure to circulate it to fire department and see if they would have any issues, since they would be perhaps the one getting a stretcher through this area. We didn't receive any concerns such as that. With regards to grading, similar to how it was circulated to fire services, it was also circulated to our development engineering team. We also have several stormwater development engineers specializing in stormwater management. None of our development engineers raised concerns about grading, and as a condition of approval for the minor variance, there is the standard provision that there can be no adverse effects to the adjacent properties. The walkway couldn't be at a higher grade than the current grass in the area, such that the water would flow off of the walkway and onto the adjacent property. It would maintain its current grade, and it is anticipated that the water would flow downhill since there is a hill on the property.
Yeah, Ken?
So just to be perfectly clear, before the minor variance is finalized, they're going to have to demonstrate in engineering terms how to insert a 1.2 meter sidewalk and a 1.24 meter side yard with grades and drainage provisions. My concern is the neighbor's concern is drainage. They'll have to satisfy the city engineers that they can fit this sidewalk in before this variance is approved, irrespective of the gas meter. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Jacob.
Just have a question about that mechanism. How would that work with respect to just laying down interlock, for example, at the side of a house? You wouldn't necessarily need a permit or any kind of review for that, would you?
That's correct. Under normal circumstances, normal meaning that if the side yard was not quite so small and that if the gas meter was on the other side of the house, for instance, if we take the gas meter out of the equation for this minor variance, and this was just to be, this application initially started off as a building permit, just for an additional residential unit, very similar to many other building permits for additional residential units around the city. Through a review of that, it was identified that there was the gas meter issue that could pose a potential obstruction, and that's the reason that staff elected to go through this minor variance process to begin with, and to confirm the things I just mentioned about emergency access being available if it's necessary under any circumstances. But if that gas meter had not been there, or if there was sufficient room to sort of go around the gas meter, this would not have gone for a minor variance application. It would have just been a simple building permit that would have been reviewed. That would also be reviewed by development engineers as well as planning staff, but it wouldn't go through the larger minor variance process that we're going through at the moment.
Okay, and just to follow, Megan, you had something to add?
I was just going to further clarify, Mr. Slevin's correct. Any property in the city of Kingston is not permitted to make alterations to their property that would have negative adverse impacts on their neighbors in terms of the drainage of water. Any building permit application that's submitted to the city that may impact the grading of a property is reviewed by development engineering for that very reason. So regardless of the need for a variance in this instance, city staff would have had the opportunity to review a concept plan which details the proposed pathway through the building permit application stage for the establishment of the second unit.
Great, thanks for that. And Peter, you had a question.
Just for clarification, I guess, coming back, so I think you had mentioned that one of you did anyhow, that the minor variance couldn't be approved until it was determined that but I believe the minor variance says we are okay with the meter, but then when you go to get the permit to alter the property, the building permit, I guess, then that's when your engineering department would take a look at the concern raised about the drainage, the stormwater drainage there. But it doesn't, we're not really taking a look at that as part of the minor variance. I think we're looking at the encroachment of the meter into the proposed walkway. We're not looking really at the drainage. That's building department, I guess, or whoever would look at that. That's just for clarification. I think that's correct. Am I not?
That's correct. The variance that is requested is simply to allow the localized protrusion of the gas meter into the area of the walkway. The walkway itself, as Jacob rightfully noted, could be constructed today. It's just to provide for a walkway that contains that localized protrusion in meeting the needs of the zoning bylaw for a walkway accessing a second unit.
And this is just a case of the bylaw not anticipating this particular projection, like the gas meter, like chimney breasts, that kind of thing would be normally included?
That's exactly correct. So the zoning bylaw currently doesn't contemplate allowances generally for encroachments into the 1.2 meter walkway. Very interestingly, we have since found that some other municipalities do provide, as of right, for those types of localized projections within their zoning bylaw general provisions, which is something that we'll likely explore as staff moving forward, as we obviously are in a place where we're wanting to incentivize this type of intensification within the urban boundary.
Yeah, that's good. And if I could just clarify, the owner would, if the owner had the gas meter moved, we wouldn't be here. Right. Okay. Okay, I have no further questions. Anybody else? So we'll open the public portion of the meeting. Does anybody here wish to speak to the application for 1157 Halifax Drive? Please raise your hand. Yep, you want to come and take any one of these chairs with a microphone, please?
My name's Lori Smith. I am one of the owners, along with my husband, of 1155 Halifax Drive, and I apologize, I'm a terrible public speaker. I get very nervous. I'm also the author of the email chain that you referred to that's been submitted. I'm here to act as a good neighbor, because so far we've gotten off on the wrong foot. We thought we had started well with the new owners. Apparently not. We've never had a problem in the 4 years we've lived at 1155 Halifax. We've always had great relations with our neighbors. Our primary concern, aside from the fact that they've taken a very small bungalow and are proposing to put at least 8 people in there, because at present there's 6 that live upstairs with 3 vehicles. One of my concerns is parking availability. It's going to become very congested. And as noted in the report, you know, there's to be no disruption of the streetscape or adverse impacts of any kind. I see this as an adverse impact. I've had one of the vehicles parked in front of my house for a week now. But that aside, I just want to put that on record, Mr. Chair. Our yard and 1157 are both unfenced yards. And we spend a great deal of time outside. I'm privy to the comings and goings, and yes, there is a path on down on Halifax Drive to access the green space at the rear of our places. However, people see an unfenced yard and they bolt because, you know, shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So oftentimes we have people cut through on both sides of our property. Now, you will see in the report, I believe it's Exhibit H, that shows, it's a picture of the center of both properties there where the proposed walkway is going to go. It doesn't really show the extent of both the downward slope towards the backyard and the sloping of each easement, for lack of a better word, to the swale. I don't know about you guys, but I've never walked on a sidewalk that goes like this. So proposing a sidewalk, I'm thinking it's going to be flat. And where's that water going to go? It's also a safety hazard. It's a liability concern to both our properties, I would argue. That's great that they've got 8 solar lights, and on sunny days they might come on. It's not going to do a whole lot. Plus, we're going to have strangers traipsing through at all hours. And like, they access it as a grass area now. If they see a sidewalk, hey, that's going to be even more inviting. So that is a concern we have. You folks did address how it was going to connect to the street, because I wasn't quite clear with that either. Sounds like they're going to walk up, connected to the existing walkway from the street, and walk in front of the renters that are already there. That's a little awkward. But anyway, I also have concerns for the resale and the property value of our place. It's a very quiet, serene area so far, and having basically a thoroughfare put between the 2 houses is not ideal to us or anybody looking to purchase, perhaps. And I know there's a letter of support from the other side, not necessarily support. He argued that he didn't see the big deal, so put it on his side. You know, by the time you take away, like, you have 1.23 meters of space on our side. By the time you take away the obstruction amount, you've got 0.88 meters left. On the other side, there's 0.76. And then it opens up into a 2.44 meter wide area beside their house. I have no problem if it's over there. It's garage to garage on those houses. There's no noise issue. And it's a lot more private because it runs through in between the driveways of both houses, as opposed to a glaring opening down the center of our yards, which are shared. I'm finished.
Thanks very much for that. Do we have any other members of the public with us wishing to speak to the application for 1157 Halifax Drive? Please raise your virtual hand or physical hand. And my third and final call, is anybody with us this evening here to speak to the application for 1157 Halifax Drive? Please raise your hand. I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and turn it back over to the applicant or staff to address the public comments.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'll do my best to answer each of these concerns in turn, and if the applicant, or sorry, if the property owner and applicant has anything to add to that, they may, but I'll do my best to answer each of these questions. So the first one stated was with regards to parking. Based on conversations with the applicant and floor plans, we've seen that there are 4 parking spaces on the property. There's a double garage with 2 parking spaces in the garage and a driveway that can accommodate 2 additional vehicles. So from a zoning perspective, this is ample for a single detached home with an additional dwelling unit inside of it. It's my personal understanding that the current tenants upstairs have 2 vehicles on the property, and with the potential addition of 2 more vehicles through these. But regardless of the exact number, the property as it exists with the driveway and the garage does meet the zoning standards for minimum parking. So I believe that's just addressed by the subject, the existing conditions of the subject property. With regards to public access, we have discussed the appearance of this of the walkway leading to the rear. It's my understanding that this walkway would be designed in such a way to not indicate that it's a public pathway. It would certainly appear as private property. In fact, I believe it's available in the addendum in the correspondence that the applicant and property owner has been willing to further indicate this through a type of sign indicating that this is private property, which would be available to clarify any confusion for anyone just trying to walk through the houses, seeing a walkway and thinking that it might be public. The applicant is open to clarifying that through placing signage. As far as safety, I couldn't get too much into the proposed details of the walkway because that's still to be hashed out at the building permit and the contracting stage. But it's my understanding that if people are currently making that walk up the hill, then a well-maintained walkway, especially in the winter where it's being regularly cleared of snow and salted at regular intervals, would certainly not be any more dangerous than the existing pathway, informal pathway, which is just a hill. It can be equally snowy, equally icy under certain conditions, muddy. So I believe there's a strong argument to be made that from a safety perspective, the pathway, they would be better off with the pathway from the perspective of entry. As far as the possibility of putting the walkway on the other side, this is definitely something that we looked into because after all, the other side doesn't have a gas meter. But while the other side doesn't have a gas meter, it doesn't extend the required 1.2 meters that the pathway needs to be. That's required in the zoning bylaw, that it needs to be unobstructed, 1.2 meter wide pathway. There simply isn't room for that on the other side, at least at all portions, and it does need to be continuous. So even though on this side there is the gas meter protrusion coming out of the wall, it is the better option when you only have 2 options for which side the pathway is going to be. Of course, going through the home itself isn't an option because there needs to be an independent exterior entrance for the additional residential unit. So as much as we're open to exploring other options, this is definitely the preferable one from a perspective of needing to vary the zoning bylaw at the least. As far as property value questions, I'm afraid that's outside the scope of land use planning. We're not making these decisions based on whether a property value will increase or decrease. We're just trying to to address the City of Kingston's priorities through, making applications conform with the zoning bylaw and the official plan to the extent possible. We're trying to do good and functional planning. And I'm afraid those are the criteria that we're basing this off of rather than property values. Thank you.
Very good, thanks for that. Okay, committee members, do you have any further questions for follow-up? Yes, Dave.
I would like to know if you've investigated having the gas meter relocated and what your intention is. You might have mentioned it before and I might have missed it with respect to fencing along that side.
So I can answer the question in terms of relocating the gas meter because I have went to extensive efforts working with Enbridge Gas, inquiring about that as being a feasible option. In terms of not the cost, but just disruption to the neighborhood in general. Again, I'm not a gas line installer, but they have said it would require significant disruption in terms of digging trenches, et cetera. So we felt that this would be an easier, more viable option.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Speaker. So with regards to the gas meter option, even if we were to move the gas meter to the other side of the property, we would still need to construct the walkway on this side that's shared with 1155 Halifax Drive, and that would not alleviate any of the concerns that have been brought up. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I was wondering, did we also get a chance to address the public comments that were brought up earlier? Yes, yes, yeah. So through you, Mr. Speaker, regarding this issue of drainage that's been brought up again and again, we have sought the recommendation and advice of landscapers and contractors, all of whom have advised us on the viability and safety of a walkway. So if you can imagine a swale, we would need to bring down the grading on our side, which would actually cause most of the stormwater drainage to be on our walkway, which is alleviated by the fact that it's now a flat surface that allows the water to efficiently drain downhill. So according to the advice of our contractors and the landscapers we've consulted, it's actually physically impossible for there to be, stormwater drainage to be, caused to be onto the adjacent property from this walkway because we are bringing the grading down.
Ken?
Mr. Gao, did you investigate the possibility of providing access to both units by way of the existing front door of the house, meaning interior renovations? And I asked that question on the basic assumption that if you came in, 2 units accessible for front door would need no walkway down the side, albeit at cost, but that's my assumption behind the question. Maybe the staff can correct my assumption first.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. As far as having the option of just going through the front door, I don't believe it's a planning or a zoning issue, but I think it's rather in the building code that it's certainly the law in some area that you couldn't just walk through someone else's unit to access the additional residential unit. There is the possibility of having sort of a split entrance where you go into some sort of common vestibule where there would be an upper and a lower unit from there, but perhaps the property owner could follow up on this more. I believe in this particular case, the renovations for that would have to be so extensive as to essentially make this extra unit unfeasible.
I'd like to hear from the applicant.
Yeah, through Mr. Speaker. So unfortunately, the floor plan of the property is not included with this application, but it was included with our building permit application. It would be architecturally almost infeasible because the stairway going downstairs from the main floor is in the middle of the house. And regardless, we would ideally like to provide the bottom unit tenants a means of egress that is safe, and to our belief, going through their walkout basement door would be the safest option rather than traversing through and sharing the exit with an upstairs tenants.
Okay. Ken?
So if I understood you as well, Mr. Gale, you're using your hands, and I understand. The proposal is to eliminate the swale as a V shape and instead make it, for all intents and purposes, flatter on your side, and therefore take the drainage on your side of the lot line towards your wall. Is that correct? That's your proposal, is that right?
So through Mr. Speaker, so the proposed walkway would have to be flat. It would not be feasible at the current slope of the grading. So our proposal is to construct it below the current grade and at the property line meet the property line grade to be a flat surface as required by the bylaw.
And Peter? Oh.
Yeah, just a couple of questions here. And the one is, as you mentioned, if you're accessing, as suggested here, through a vestibule, actually accessing both of them, again, they have to be fire separated so that in event of fire in one unit, that it doesn't affect the exiting of the other unless you have a direct access at the back going outside. The other thing is the lighting was an issue, and I looked at that too, and I looked at the number of windows on the side of the neighboring house, and actually on your property as well. And if you had lights that were on there all night long or something, I think that's number one. It's not going to be very pleasant for the neighbors or your tenants. Number two, it might attract people to come in. And but there are motion sensor lights. I have one on my deck that you can set the time on for, I don't know, 3-4 minutes, whatever, you know. And even in the daytime when I go out, I haven't figured out how to set it yet, but even in the daytime when I go out, it comes on. But it doesn't stay on, and it provides plenty of lighting. They're very inexpensive, and but I would strongly suggest if you're to contemplate that, to consider that, I should say, that if you're going to put lighting in there, then it should be something that be sensitive to the neighbors' comfort as well, that it's not going to be sitting blaring in their window all night long. I don't think that would be very pleasant. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. And Peter? I'm sorry, David.
I have a question to Jacob with respect to, actually, I just need one moment. I just want to have a look at a diagram for 1 second.
Okay. Any other questions? Somna?
Actually, I'm good, thank you.
You're good? Okay. All right, so on that, I guess we'll go into deliberation. So can we have a motion on the floor? To be moved by Somnath and seconded by Peter? Any discussion? I mean, I'll chime in just by saying it certainly satisfies the intent of, intensification and the zoning bylaw on an official plan. The thing that gets me is that they could move the gas meter and wouldn't even be here. And therefore, it could go in anyway. So as a result, I don't really see a problem with the gas meter being there, especially if it's been signed off by Emergency Services, Kingston Fire Service. So I would be voting in favor of it.
That would be my comment too. I notice fire was circulated and they have no comment. So we're to conclude that there's no concern with respect to getting a gurney, for example, past that gas meter. That we can safely assume that or conclude that.
Thank you. That was my assumption based on the circulation. There was plenty of time during technical review that if there were any concerns, they, it would have been very easy to reach out and express those and, suggest alternatives or anything like that. But since we haven't received any correspondence from fire or other emergency services department, I took that to mean that there weren't any substantial concerns as far as access.
Okay, good, thank you. Yes, Ken?
I'm much more comfortable supporting the application on the basis of Mr. Gayo's commitment to basically cut the grade down and take the drainage on his side of the lot.
Yeah, good point.
And if I understand it correctly, I'm going to look for a nod. A building permit is necessary to introduce this additional residential unit, and the obligation in the minor variance conditions, which will be pass-through building, will resolve the engineering detail of this sidewalk to the satisfaction of the city engineers. And I expect the city engineers are going to want a professional engineer stamp. I appreciate the advice of contractors and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's a PN who's going to have to stamp it and guarantee it for your purposes and presumably your purposes as well. I take comfort from the gentleman's response to how to address grading, and we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. This is step one. You got to get to second base, and the second base is going to be the engineering drawing. If it doesn't fly, it doesn't work. That's how I understand it.
Very, very good points. Yeah, very good points. Okay, so if that's that, then I'll call for the vote. All in favor, raise your physical hand. And that's unanimously carried. Thank you. All right, the next application is number 8G, which is an application for permission. 4300 Bath Road. Lindsay, I'll have you read this into the record, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is an application for permission, file number D13039-2023 at 4300 Bath Road, to expand a legal non-complying detached accessory building with the construction of exterior stairs leading to the second floor of the existing garage.
Okay, do we have the applicant with us? Okay. Welcome, Shelley and some guy. Welcome. Will you just have you state your name and your address for the record, please?
My name is Shelley Poffley, 4300 Bath Road in Kingston.
Okay. All right, welcome. Is there anything further you want to add to the application?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Committee members, do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff? I see none, so do we have any members? I'll open the public portion of the meeting. Do we have members of the public with us wishing to speak to the application for 4300 Bath Road? Please raise your physical hand or virtual hand in Zoom. We have nobody in the house. Do we have anybody with us wishing to speak to the application for 4300 Bath Road? Please raise your virtual hand. Final call. Is anybody wishing to speak to the application for 4300 Bath Road? Raise your virtual hand in Zoom. And I see none, so I'll close the public portion of the meeting and come back to the committee for a motion. So moved by Ken and seconded by David. Any discussion? Yes, Peter?
Just a comment that the stairway that's there now is being replaced. The new stairway will go in the exact same location from what I understand.
Yep, that's right.
And I noticed that the concern was the setback from the water within the 30 meters setback. But the remainder of the back of the house is much closer to the water as it is. So, you know, there's certainly, it's not going to be increasing the problem. So, no, I don't have any problem with it at all.
Good. I would agree. Okay, so all in favor, raise your physical hand, and that's unanimously carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, so we have no motions, no notices of motions, no other business, no correspondence, and the date of the next meeting is Monday, October 16th at 5:30 p.m. So could I have a motion for adjournment? So moved by Ken and seconded by David. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your physical hands, and that's carried and unanimously carried. Meeting adjourned at 7:53 p.m. Thanks, people.